questions are first read, what is consciousness? No one's defined it yet. Somehow, it has to be associated with mind and life. Supposedly, at least humans have consciousness. We sort of have to have consciousness. We define it. And we refer to ourselves when we define it. Science is having trouble defining it because everyone defines it differently. It has different meanings within different subjects. Anesthesiologist in the hospital would define it as a state when you're not unconscious. You're either conscious or unconscious. Yet in physics, consciousness has a much broader meaning in that humans have consciousness. It's like an overriding principle. Whether we're conscious or unconscious, we are conscious beings. We have consciousness. So there are different meanings in different disciplines. And study of consciousness is an interdisciplinary study. Anesthesiologists, doctors of all types, physicists, chemists, endocrinologists who study chemistry of the brain, neuroscientists, biologists, theoretical biologists. Everybody has their own take on it. But this is a physics take. And as a working hypothesis, I can consider consciousness the simplest and probably the only definition everybody can agree on is consciousness is self-awareness, awareness of the self. And as far as we know, only humans have consciousness. We can't say, probably dolphin family have some type of consciousness, but we really can't tell. And some people might argue that rocks have consciousness, but it depends on how broadly or how, no, really, people do argue that rocks have consciousness. One of the big questions is in consciousness studies, do other living beings, organisms, have consciousness, or is it just human consciousness? Now, consciousness traditionally has not been part of physics. Traditionally, going back to the days of René Descartes in 1630s, 1640s, he separated mind and body. And body being simple mechanical system, physics has always studied the body. Physical sciences have always been interested only in the body, not the mind. So consciousness has not been part of physics until just past 30 or 40 years. And consciousness, the study of consciousness in physics actually re-entered the study of physics through quantum mechanics because it's believed, well, for any given event you have an infinite number of possibilities for a given event to occur in quantum mechanics. It's called the state vector. And consciousness chooses between all the million different possibilities, and it does something called collapsing the wave function to have an actual event then. And it takes consciousness to collapse the wave function, or consciousness can collapse the wave function. And that is a standard part of quantum physics. And so consciousness has re-entered physics through quantum physics. And that's only in the last 40 years, since about 1960, with the work of Eugene Wigner. But it's gotten very, very popular in the past 20 years. And I just returned from an international conference on consciousness in Tucson, Arizona, a few weeks ago. And right now, in the physics of consciousness, the only viable theory at present, other than my own, the only popular and viable theory is the Hameroff-Penrose model. Penrose is a mathematical physicist in Britain, Sir Roger Penrose. He was knighted for his accomplishments in science. And Stuart Hameroff, who is an anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, down in Tucson. And it's called the OR model. And basically it deals with tubulin proteins, or small water-based proteins that exist in groups called microtubules in the stem and the axons and the neurons in your brain. And all your brain cells have the microtubules in them. And they believe that they cascade. One will fire and a group of them will fire, and then that's the roots of consciousness. It's a cascade process. And this is starting something of a controversy in physics because they're trying to locate consciousness in individual molecules, protein molecules in the brain. And other people say, no, consciousness is some great big broad thing involving the whole brain and the whole body all at the same time. You can't localize consciousness down to a few proteins in the brain. And in physics, that's called the coherence problem. And many scientists will, coherence means that everything's acting in concert together. And many physicists argue that the microtubule model, the Bohr model, is no good because there's no coherence within the brain. The brain is too small in quantum mechanics to have a coherent wave pattern. It more or less decoheres. In other words, waves interact with each other and destroy each other. So this can't be the root of consciousness. And then the other scientists argue, well, again, that you can't have consciousness at the micro level. It has to be a macro type thing. And my theory is a macro theory. Now, the basis of my theory is quite different. In physics, we have the quantum theory, which deals with the microscopic world, and relativity theory with the macroscopic world. Quantum theory is discrete particles. The relativity theory is relationship, the relationship between material particles. And so I'm going against the physical trend because this represents, the quantum view of physics represents 99% of physicists in the world. Only a few of us that are basically continuity physicists dealing with relativity, and that's the take I've got. My theory is based on general relativity, special and general relativity. And my theory, the single field theory, SOFT for short, is a 5-dimensional model. And actually, my theory has quite an illustrious theory. I'm just building on previous theories. Let me see, these theories started with a 4-dimensional space in 1869. Back before space-time, when space-time were separate. And so they had a 3-dimensional space and separate time in normal physics. The mathematician of Britain, William Kingdom Clifford, developed the notion that a 3-dimensional space is curved in a 4th dimension. And he's actually a friend of James Clerk Maxwell's, who invented electromagnetic theory, and he tried to put the electromagnetic theory into a 4-dimensional configuration. And although Maxwell never believed it, he thought Clifford was one of the most brilliant people that ever lived. And he basically developed the idea of a 3-dimensional sheet curved in 4-dimensional space. And then our being, our existence is within this 3-dimensional sheet. As a side, if you go to philosophy, Clifford's famous in mathematics for Clifford algebras and other things. But in philosophy, he's famous for having developed the concept of mind stuff, which you could consider that as a precursor to the physical theories of the mind and physical theories of consciousness. Sort of interesting and just a coincidence, or possibly more than a coincidence, who knows. Then from 1870 to 1890, Simon Newcomb and other well-known scientists actually tried to extend Clifford's theory. Clifford is a sad case. He died in 1879 at the age of 34 of tuberculosis, consumption at that time. And he was not active in science after 1875, science or mathematics, because he was just too sick all the time. So he had a very short career, and the British people thought that he was the next Newton. I mean, all the scientists and mathematicians in Britain had extremely high regard for him. He was very well regarded. And 1870s, early 1880s, Simon Newcomb, who was one of the first top American scientists, world-renowned. He was a Canadian who transplanted to America, and he was chief astronomer at the Naval Observatory down in Washington, D.C. And he developed the mathematics of a higher dimensional space. And rather weird mathematics, because if you take a rubber ball and throw it in the 4th dimension space and bring it back again, it's turned inside out. Without tearing, without ripping. It's just inside out. If you stick your left hand into the 4th dimensional space and bring it back, you've got 2 right hands, because it automatically reverses, does a mirror reverse on physical matter into the 4th dimension. Now that's important because that explains some of the modern things, as in spin particles in modern physics. 1905-16, Einstein developed special relativity and general relativity, where you have a 4-dimensional space-time. And everybody sort of forgot about the 4-dimensional spaces, because here was a 4-dimensional thing, but it was space-time instead of just 4-dimensional space. 1921, totally independent of previous work in 4-dimensional spaces, Theodore Kaluza took Einstein's relativity and hypothesized a 5th dimension and he is able to unify the gravity field and electromagnetic field, something that no one else has been able to do to this day. He's the only one who's successfully unified electromagnetism and gravity. And that was with five-dimensional field. Another unknown paper, William Wilson in England, 1926 and after, with other colleagues, developed a five-dimensional wave mechanics. In other words, quantum theory. They developed quantum theory in five-dimensional spaces. This is all already developed. One of the professors, physics professors of my doctoral committee, couldn't understand how I was combining quantum theory and relativity theory in the single field theory. Well, I don't have to. It was done by William Wilson and others after 1926. So a lot of the work, as you see, has already been done. 1938 to 1941, Einstein worked with Peter Bergman and Valentin Bardman, developing Kaluza's theory further. Kaluza's theory, he suggested but didn't state why or how. The fifth dimension, we're all five-dimensional beings, but the fifth dimension is of sub-microscopic proportion. In other words, all of our material world has a very, very small, unnoticeable extension in the fifth direction, and that's why we don't sense the fifth dimension. Einstein, Bergman, and Bardman came along later and said, no, you don't have to have that suggestion. You can actually develop a unified theory of electromagnetism and gravity by having a macroscopic extension. But then, once that was said and done, proven by Einstein and colleagues, the theory died because Einstein couldn't figure out if we are extended macroscopically, up to hundreds and billions of miles in the fifth dimension, why don't we sense it? And so he had to give up the theory. Well, the answer to that is you go back to Clifford's idea of a sheet. Our overall extension in the fifth dimension is macroscopic, of large proportions, universal proportions, yet we exist in just a small, thin sheet of submicroscopic proportions. That sheet is a four-dimensional space-time continuum of general relativity. And that's the basis of the theory. The theory was just about done by all these people before I got wind of it and started developing it on my own. Basically, we live in a small sheet. This is the fifth direction. This is what I call free space. And then time would be out of board. So time going in, out of board, and we live on this very, very small sheet in the fifth dimension. So the whole material world is stuck within this sheet. So we never normally sense through our five senses. We never normally sense the fifth dimension. Elementary particles are bumps, burble, and folds in the sheet. And this particular fold in the sheet would be a simple proton. Now, although the material portion of the sheet is folded, you have a line going all the way around, extending and coming back up on the other side. And Kaluza called that an A line. That's where all the mathematics. This line is a five-dimensional correspondent to a mathematical point in normal space. And that's where all the action is. Because this line would be perpendicular to the sheet. When you fold over for a particle, this line folds over and runs parallel to the sheet. So if you have particles like this, separate particles stretched in the fifth direction, they're actually connected to each other. The fifth dimension, I've had people ask me, what is the fifth dimension? It's a field. It is a precursor to gravity field, it's a precursor to the electromagnetic field, the weak and strong nuclear fields. All the fields derive from the single field. And the single field is the only thing that occupies five-dimensional space-time. The sheet and elementary particles, the folds, bumps in the sheet, are nothing more but the densest part of the sheet. Out here, the field is very rarefied. But the key is that all material particles are connected to each other through the fifth dimension. And this is actually what gives rise to my theory of consciousness. It's not just a theory of consciousness. It's a theory of life, mind, and consciousness. And that's unique to any of the theories of consciousness that I've discovered, because everyone's trying to develop a theory of consciousness, just consciousness, without trying to relate them to either mind or life. And they start from here and go back to life. I'm starting from life and working up to mind. And it's all in this super-dimensional connection between all material particles. Now, if we take ordinary chemistry, everyday chemistry, you take two molecules of hydrogen with one molecule of oxygen, you put a flame to it, it goes poof, and you've got water, H2O. Simple chemistry. A physicist would see that as particle exchanges between the molecules, that the electrons in the oxygen and hydrogen become shared. So that is an energy change. Now, an energy change to a physicist is a change in speed. Now, according to special relativity, as an object goes faster, it is called Lorentz contracted, and the mass increases. So, when a particle speeds up, the curvature that defines the particle becomes steeper. At the same time, its width decreases. So what that does is it pushes the particle further up into the fifth dimension. That's conservation of mass and energy. Now, as the particle speeds up and slows down, it goes up, slows down, it comes back down. So a particle is gaining energy and losing energy. It's just going up and down in the fifth dimension, according to the theory of special relativity. Now, those changes in energy, where it's going up and down, this would be the density center. The density center of the particles in the single field. These density centers would go up and down, and they cause disruptions in the overall five-dimensional field. We're not going to feel those disruptions within the sheet, within the four-dimensional space-time. It's strictly a five-dimensional phenomenon. So when you have a lot of molecules reacting, the whole same chemical reacting, and they're shooting up and down the fifth dimension, because they disturb the field around them, they start resonating and working together. They form a small resonance for the chemical reaction, a simple chemical reaction. Then you have an equilibrium reaction. It can either go forwards or backwards in chemistry. And it builds up equilibrium, builds a stronger pattern where the molecules are all moving together. Their density centers of five-dimensional space start resonating together. And that is a chemical reaction. Now, you get different chemical reactions. Suppose this is a water reaction. This is some type of a protein reaction. You've got some other chemical reaction here. You find the proper assortment of chemical reactions. Each has its own resonance. But even though they're different chemical reactions, how are they still connected across the five-dimensional field? So after the chemical reactions start, they come to a place where the different chemical reactions all start resonating with each other. Now, the ordinary chemical reactions would be called chaos. But when you have a group of different chemicals in equilibrium reactions, all setting up a resonance, that would be called a complexity. In chaos theory, or what's called nonlinear dynamics. That complexity, that first level complexity, is life. Now, that theory alone fits all the expectations for what a theory of life would be. For hundreds of years now, people have thought, scientists and laymen alike, have thought that there's something more to life than just the mechanics, more than electricity and the magnetism in the body and the mechanics. of the body's working. They called it vis viva. They've had many different names for it. No one's really discovered what it was. And this is what it is. It's a first level chemical complexity. That is what it's like. Now, life evolves out of the chemical reactions. But once life has evolved, it turns around and becomes the organizer of the chemical reactions. How does it organize them? Well, this newly living body, this new organism with life, interacts in space and time with different types of stimuli. You know, it bumps up against the wall, or it comes next to something and says, that's good, I'm going to eat it. And it starts evolving further, but only under the organization of life. Then life controls the functions of the organism, and then new chemical reactions due to connections and attachments it makes in space and time, four-dimensional space-time, the physical environment, new chemical reactions come in for digesting food and everything else. The living organism then starts evolving further. The more it comes in contact with other things, other bodies within four-dimensional space and time, our normal framework, what happens? Well, it starts differentiating into different parts, different organs within the organism. Now it develops kidneys, gallbladders, skin, bone, instead of just being a blob of life. Each of those has its own little complexity as organized by life. But eventually, with the addition of more and more complicated organs, it has to develop a new organ to control all the other ones. Anybody want to guess? A brain. It develops a brain to control the interrelationships, the functions of all the organs. So they're all doing what? They're all working together to continue life. When brain develops in four-dimensional space-time, electrical, mechanical, chemical device, that corresponds to the development of another complexity that we call mind. So as brain evolves, you have mind. And just like the complexity of life, mind, after it evolves, organizes life below it. It's a second level complexity above life. Then mind starts controlling life. It becomes the organizer of life, just as life is still organizing the chemical reactions below that make up the organism. This process continues. The body is more complex now. It can get around more. It can see, it can hear, it can taste, it can feel. It can smell more different variety, larger variety of stimuli within its own space-time environment. Now first, with brain, and even before, the body is only contact with things that it immediately senses. We call this local interactions in physics. But after a time, the brain is building new electrical chemical processes called memories. Memories, new electrical chemical process, are collecting in the brain, causing new patterns within the brain. And at first, the brain realizes that, gee, after all, you guys go home, leave the room, even if I stay in a room, my brain tells me that you still exist out there beyond the room. That's called a non-local effect in physics. Spatially non-local. So first the brain, through its memories, chemical patterns and memories, realizes that space extends beyond the immediate range of its five normal senses. So it develops a concept of place, an abstraction of space. Next, it develops what? Concept of time. It realizes the flow of time, because, gee, it had its memories of you yesterday, and if you exist elsewhere in space, you must exist elsewhere in time. It develops the concept of the flow of time, past, present, and future. what happens at that point? The chemical patterns in the brain, electrochemical patterns in the brain, their memories, come to a new pattern of organization. They coalesce into consciousness, which is a third level complexity of these connections of the particles in five-dimensional space. So consciousness evolves. And just as the two before, consciousness then organizes mind below it. So we have this four-tier system. The chemical reactions make up the body, and we can add mechanical interactions also. Above that, life. Above that, mind. Above that, consciousness. This is where we are right now in our evolutionary path. Now, all this is just purely logical derivation from a combined Einstein-Clifford model, both of which are accepted already. So this is logical deduction, not inventing anything new. And this is the only theory of consciousness that I know of that is one, evolutionary. You go back and explain Darwinian evolution. It's historical. It's got a broad base of well-known scientists below it to develop this. So this is unique. Now, those scientists and philosophers and scholars arguing against this model say, well, consciousness must be some overriding effect, relationship between different parts of the mind and your senses and memories and your imagination, all the things, your thoughts, all the things that make up mind. And they talk about chaos theory and complexity. They say, you read the books on it, and they say, well, consciousness must be some kind of complexity. So, this theory actually fulfills the requirements many of the scientists are making for consciousness. Now, this is only the starting point, because fun things start happening now. If this is true, the strangeness is only beginning. Because now, by the time we get up to life, mind, consciousness, instead of representing single particles, a proton and such as interacting, we can look at more of a macroscopic view and represent John Doe as a fold of the four-dimensional sheet in the fifth dimension. And Jane, different people, their overall curvatures of their individual particles would make those people. And this is a pattern. Here's your chemical reactions in your four-dimensional. The chemical reactions are stuck within the four-dimensional space-time. Life is a bridge between the four-dimensional space-time and the fifth dimension. Mind and consciousness are purely five-dimensional pattern structures up here in fifth dimension. Density pattern structures, resonances in five-dimensional space. Now, that has some nasty consequences. First of all, if you have some type of an wonderful emotional thing, an emotional shock, it sets the chemicals racing within your body, doesn't it? Okay, so that's going to mean the chemicals in your body, again, are bouncing up and down to five-dimensional space-time. I call that the aspect. The aspect is decreasing in the fifth dimension. That's going to cause a resonance, a fluctuation in your normal pattern. That fluctuation, since this is all single field, that fluctuation is going to cause a disturbance in the field. And if Jane is well aware of her own presence in the fifth dimension, what's she going to do? She's going to feel those changes. She will sense those changes. We call that extrasensory perception. If John Doe over here gets really good and realizes his fifth-dimensional connection with all other living beings in the universe and all other material particles in the universe, and utilizes that, he's going to be able to affect Jane over there, and if she's sick, maybe heal her. Psychic healer. At least help her align her own resonance so she's no longer sick. Because what is a disease? It's a disruption in the life, dysresonance, what we call decohering pattern within the coherent life pattern. So maybe John Doe here can help a psychic healer, heal her. Or maybe he can do better yet and get really good at it, make objects move through space and time. PK, psychokinesis. There is an explanation of what are called paranormal phenomena. This is the only theory I know of that can explain not only the paranormal phenomena, but all of them at the same time. So my theory is unique for this. And again, if this theory of life-mind consciousness is true, it depends on the connections between the atoms, individual atoms, and their resonant patterns. And if you can make a resonant pattern from one molecule, one atom to another, one molecule to another, one bodily organ to another, there's no reason why you can't do it from one organism to another. So this theory requires the existence of ESP, psychic healing, and psychokinesis. They are actually built into the structure of the space-time continuum. That's just a logical deduction from Einstein's theory. What else? It gets hairier after that. It gets crazier after that. What happens when you die? What happens when an organism dies? Chemical reactions cease, correct? To a chemist, all the chemical, at first it's the major chemical reactions or mechanical reactions like the heart pumping blood, electrical conductivity in the brain or something. Your fingernails still grow, your hair still grows, but those are not life-threatening. I mean the basic chemical reactions that make life cease to function. We call that in physics decoherence. It causes a disruption. What does that disruption affect? Life. The disruption of the chemical process affects life. Mind and consciousness are protected from that disruption. We would say they are mutually cohering complexities in physics. They cohere each other. They reinforce each other. So, when the body dies, life disappears, what's left? The mind-consciousness complex survives death of the body. And what is that? Well, the chemical reaction stops, life stops, but there's still this pattern up here in five-dimensional space. It continues to exist. This is life after death. Survival of consciousness upon death of the body. Survival of consciousness on the death of the body. So, if a living thing has reached a state where it actually gets up to consciousness, it survives death. Now, something you have to realize about this whole scheme. Up in the fifth dimension, you are not within four-dimensional space-time. It's like the top of this table is my four-dimensional space-time. There are three dimensions of space, and there are time. In physics, this is called a space-time diagram. I'm not making it up. The fifth dimension is out on the top of the table. If your consciousness is up here, is it localized in a point in space and point in time? No, it's outside of space and time. The consciousness, once it separates from the body, realizes all of time below it at the same time. It's outside of time. It still exists here in the past. That resonance pattern is still here in the past. The resonance pattern in five-dimensional space-time being outside of four-dimensional space-time in that fifth dimension, it continues in the fifth dimension. It's a continuity. It can't just die. The physics requires survival of consciousness at death. If that surviving consciousness, you have some possibilities here. If that surviving consciousness does not realize the body has died, the mind and consciousness, for its whole existence, the mind and consciousness of the individual have been thriving on what is seen by the body, what is heard by the body, as filtered through the brain, what is smelled by the body, what is touched by the body, what is tasted by the body, the five ordinary senses. The five ordinary senses bring through four-dimensional space-time, they bring information to the mind, through the brain to the mind. Now what happens when the body dies? No more input from four-dimensional space-time. The mind is still looking for input, information to be received through the brain. If the complex that survives does not realize it has died, what does it sense? Total blackness. Now, in the past 30 years, another study that relates to consciousness studies has been developing. It's called near-death experiences. It's people who have, some who have actually died on operating tables in hospitals and been revived, people who have drowned, they're revived 10 minutes later, or people who have been thought they were going to die, and somehow they feel they leave their body. What do they experience when they leave their body? They come back from having died, and they tell of experiences. And a lot of scientists for many years didn't believe them, but now scientists are starting to believe them. They have explanations for it. My explanation for the near-death experience is they are experiencing pure mind consciousness, individual mind consciousness. They are experiencing their fifth dimension when input from four-dimensional space-time ceases because the brain has died. The mind complexity that survives is still looking for input, information input. It can't get it through four-dimensional space-time, five senses, so it continues to look for it. If it doesn't realize it's died, it senses blackness. There are people who've experienced NDEs say it's nothing but blackness. If the mind consciousness complex that survives realizes it survives, it starts intaking information. Where's it going to get information? Can't get it through four-dimensional space-time. It gets it from elsewhere within the fifth dimension. It starts using its extra-normal senses. Instead of coming from chemical reactions, brain, life to mind, it reverses the process. Now your input is through consciousness, extra-dimensionally, in the fifth dimension, to mind. Now, what are the things it's going to look for? Well, first, the mind might look at its own memories, its own past life. In near-death experiences, this is called past life review. It starts realigning its own memories. Since it's above space and time, it will experience its whole life in a moment, a single moment, because it's out of time. That's exactly what's described by people who've had near-death experiences. Another description is they see the white light, the tunnel of light. Well, what is that? Well, between these two bodies in time, what is there? What physical exists between all of us? The air in the room, correct? What else fills up this room besides air? Light. All wavelengths of light. Visible light from the whole spectrum added up is white light, right? But there are also X-rays and gamma rays and ultraviolet rays and infrared rays. The whole electromagnetic spectrum of light is in this room. So, as the surviving mind consciousness starts taking in, or itself spreading out into the fifth dimension, what might it sense all around it? Light. Because light is everywhere around it as line elements in the fifth dimension. That's what a light wave is, or a photon. It's a line element in the fifth dimension. The mind consciousness complex senses that. All, not just visible light, but all the wavelengths of invisible light. That is the brilliant white light that people describe who have had near-death experiences. It's just the consciousness starting to take in information from the outside. What else do they experience? Anybody else know what they say they experience?
Like seeing themselves from above, like that?
Yeah, well, seeing themselves from above, that's simple. That's as they're leaving, they're actually sensing what's left of them in four-dimensional space-time. But not themselves. They don't see themselves. Who do they see?
Anybody.
Not, that's themselves. That's their selves. That's as they're leaving four-dimensional space-time. Pardon?
People in their past.
People, but what specific people in their past? Not just everybody. You don't see some kid you knew in first grade. Who do you see?
People who made it.
Family, loved ones. Family, loved ones, and religious figures. Special friends, loved ones. You know, grandma comes to meet you when you die. Your dead mother, your dead father. Maybe Jesus, Muhammad, or Buddha. People report that too. Now, what is their connection to all these people? What is that common connection to all these people? Even the religious figures. There's a very strong emotional connection. They have emotional memories of these people. They're in their mind. If this is true, then Buddhas, Jesus, Muhammad, Mom, Dad, Joe that died when I was 12 years old, his consciousness is still there in the fifth dimension. Well, how do I establish contact with him? Well, I have a memory in my mind. What is that memory? It's a pattern, isn't it? Memory is an electromagnetic pattern, in a sense. It's in your mind. Joe is out here, a really good friend. He has a pattern in his mind of you. They're resonating together. What are emotions in the body? They're extremely strong chemical interactions with your body. Emotional, chemical, a lot of energy, a lot of resonance in those. Your mind picks out the things it remembers most with great emotions, because those are the most energetic responses, chemical responses in the body. So those are the ones it picks out first. Loved ones, your friends, mother, father, dead uncle who you loved, grandma who brought you up after your parents died, and religious figures. They don't come back from near-death experience and say, gee, I saw Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. There's no big emotional contact with them. Emotional contacts cause more energy in the body, has stronger patterns with the mind. So when the mind dies, you get the response from emotional contact. What's a ghost? If the body does not realize as it dies, it's not going off in the fifth dimension. It tries to remain here. In this little tiny section of five-dimensional section of four-dimensional space-time. It still has a minimal effect on that, an apparition or a ghost. You watch some kind of ghost movie on TV, and they want to de-haunt a house. What do? They have a psychic come in. What does the psychic do? It talks to the ghost and says, go towards the light. You are dead. Go towards light. What does the psychic say? You are dead means you have no substantial connection in four-dimensional space-time. Go towards the light. You belong up here in five-dimensional space. Stick around up there. Stop bothering us. Four-dimensional space-time. The material world. Four-dimensional space-time. It all fits. The consequences of this are phenomenal. And yet again, this is just straight, logical, mathematical deduction from a theory that's based on Einstein's work. Isn't this fantastic? I just finished writing a paper that I'm going to present this summer for the Academy of Religion and Psychical Research on mediumship. I use this to explain how mediums work, by John Edward and James Van Praagh. And the keynote speaker for this conference is Gary Schwartz, who's the professor out at University of Arizona, Phoenix, who tested James Van Prague and John Edward. You know, if you've seen John Edward on TV, they say he's been proven by university professors to be the real thing. They're talking about Gary Schwartz's work with him. Now, Gary Schwartz is going to be the keynote speaker and give his experimental results. I'm coming along next day and explaining with my theory his experimental results. I hope for a really good time. But in preparing that, and I'm proofreading my paper, I have to send in the paper beforehand so it can be printed in proceedings. I just sent in Monday morning. Sunday night I'm working through it and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Beam me up, Scotty. I can use this model to build a teleportation machine. Once I get the mathematical structure, what would be called the, what do they call those? The complexity structure. An algorithm, a mathematical algorithm that represents the life, mind, and consciousness. If I get it worked down into some type of an information system, say some humongous equation, build a machine to send information about the complexity from point A to B. So that the life, mind, and consciousness could use local matter to reconstitute. Now what is that called? That's a teleporter in Star Trek. We are already doing teleportation. It's called quantum teleportation. They are doing over small distances, transporting individual elementary particles. If it's done randomly in nature in quantum mechanics, it's called the tunneling effect. But if you can make it go from one point to another, instead of random, make it go from one point to another, it's called quantum teleportation. But that's dead matter. Even if they build a teleportation machine that could take this table and teleport it to the back of the room, if they took me and tried to teleport me to the back of the room, they might transfer my matter. That doesn't mean they're going to get life, mind, and consciousness, the relationship between the material particles. This model solves that problem. You can do teleportation and have a transfer of life, mind, and consciousness. What they call in Star Trek the energy stream. Now it's called the energy stream in Star Trek, but what people who do physics of consciousness and physiology of consciousness and biology of consciousness, they call it the consciousness stream. Same difference. So there are consequences of this theory that are far-reaching for the human race. Very far-reaching for the human race. Any questions?
When you were discussing the development of the mind, you were talking about memory and the sense of time. Are those two causes simultaneous to each other, or are they?
Well, no. First you sense space. First you realize if you met Monty that, after he goes home to Australia, he still exists down in that space. But then after you learn of space beyond senses, that's called non-locality in physics. You have local quantum effects and you have non-local quantum effects in physics. That become called spatially non-local. We actually have words for that. After you learn of spatial non-locality, then you go on and learn about temporal non-locality. And that's things exist before and after this moment in time. That's when you realize the moment of life in time. The development of consciousness coincides, the mind of consciousness, that evolution, coincides with the development of awareness of the flow of time. It starts developing, it starts coalescing into consciousness, a new pattern, with non-locality of space. But it's not complete until you get non-locality of time. Now, what was my first definition? The only definition of consciousness that all scientists can pretty much agree on. Does anybody remember? Awareness of self. Now, when you become aware of yourself as separate from the rest of the world, when you develop an awareness of spatial and temporal non-locality, because then you can separate, not until that point can you separate yourself as an independent being from the rest of the universe. You have to realize the differences between locations in space and locations in time. So this model of consciousness actually fits that simple definition of consciousness that most scientists would accept.
I think it fits into early childhood development pretty well too.
Piaget's research, that is exactly, a newborn has rudimentary consciousness, just from the fact it has life, brain, mind, consciousness, but it hasn't fully developed yet. So the child naturally, as he grows older, starts learning about his environment. First it realizes only through his five senses, his local environment. Then it realizes mommy is still here even though she goes out of the room and comes back. Non-locality. Then supposedly Piaget and others have experimented on this. Then it develops a sense of time, flow of time. So this exactly matches the development of a child. Exactly. You're actually the second person to point that out, but I knew it beforehand. It's just someone else pointed that out just a week or two ago, and I said, yeah, that's Piaget's experimentation. That Piaget's work, are you familiar with Piaget's work? He was when was that, the 60s? It's quite a while ago, 50s and 60s, I think. But this is exactly just the way our consciousness builds as we go over. Yes?
The question is, if we start out with these chemical reactions and then move on to life, mind, consciousness,
Well, we don't as individuals. I'm talking about going back to the primordial ooze, 3 billion years ago.
is it after we talk about the chemical process for life stopping, and then the mind and consciousness going on by itself, is it not possible that there would be such reverse because decomposition goes on, which is a chemical process? So is there not possibly a reverse to that scale in some respect?
Are you asking, is there, let me see, not just life after death, but reincarnation?
I'm not sure where I'm going with
Well,
this.
what you're saying could be what some people call reincarnation, yes. Somehow the mind consciousness out here may, for some reason, decide to reattach itself and pick out a fetus again. It might be, I don't know, that's pure speculation. I can't do the logic part of that.
I'm just wondering if, because all of those are somehow interconnected at one point, if decomposition, which is a different form of chemical reaction, would not have some.
A negative effect sort of suck mind and consciousness out there.
I'm not sure.
No, because still, remember, in the fifth dimension, you're out of space and time. You're, in a sense, above space and time, just like I'm above space and time on this tabletop. And so from this position, in the past, in time past, that resonance still, so it could be sucked out because you have to destroy all of past history to do it.
Right.
So no, what I think you're saying, no, nothing can reverse that and destroy the mind consciousness complex after the body dies. I would think, that's my logical deduction.
Is ESP and or PK required or implied by this?
Implied. I think it's more required. I say stronger. It is required. Because again, you have the connection between individual atoms through five-dimensional space-time. Then that implies that the bodies would have a similar connection. And I mean all material bodies in the whole universe. Right now our consciousness is bringing that in. Now that also means that all conscious beings, all living beings, have ESP and PK. But only conscious beings are aware of it to some extent. And I think right now we are just becoming aware of it. Along that same line, is this the end? Is consciousness the end? Just as consciousness evolves when our four-dimensional body, through its senses, becomes aware of space and time, and four-dimensional space-time. Consciousness eventually does what? Becomes aware of the fifth dimension. So what would that mean? When consciousness becomes completely aware of the fifth dimension, and a five-dimensional existence, rather a four-dimensional space-time existence, a new evolution. Superconsciousness, which then begins to organize consciousness. Now, You all, I'm sure we're all religiously literate here. Does everyone know the story of Siddhartha Gautama, called the Buddha, when he reached enlightenment? He sat down under the bo tree for days and days and days, refusing food, and the devil came along and tried to corrupt him, but he said no. He shuts down all of his bodily senses. This is what people do in meditation. People only do meditation. You've got a person sitting meditating. Normally have the sensory intake. It's called sensory deprivation. They try and cut off all their four-dimensional senses. And what do they try and do? They try and listen to their fifth-dimensional sense. If they're successful in hearing what's coming to them five-dimensionally through their consciousness, they're successful at their meditation. Buddhists call this enlightenment. I like the word enlightenment because what do? They sense the light in fifth-dimensional space all around them, just like in near-death experiences. That's what enlightenment is. Now the Buddha, in about 650 BCE, 650 years before the Common Era, became enlightened. They often wonder to him what happened when he died, because Buddhism is a philosophy and not a religion. It has no God, it has no angels, it has no devil in a sense. It is a philosophical system. So, Buddhists have philosophical arguments what happened to Buddha when he died. Now supposedly he went right past consciousness and reached this state of super consciousness. There's some evidence there are dimensions higher than the fifth dimension. So having realized five-dimensional space-time, you could begin realization of a sixth dimension to space-time, which would coincide with the development of super consciousness. So that's also, this is more implied, using your words. This is more implied by physics. The possibility of evolving a super consciousness. That's implied. The rest of it, I think, is required by the physics. This is some pretty hairy stuff, isn't it? I gotta start writing science fiction. We can get more money out of it than this.
Curiosity question. What would a three-dimensional model be?
A three-dimensional model, it depends on whether you mean three-dimensional space or two-dimensional space with time.
If you could do a computer mod, that would be where you'd be able to play,
Well, let's look at it this way. Can I have a sheet of paper? I don't have any props with me. It's a simple sheet of paper. People try to realize, going back to the 1880s, 1890s, when they were talking about four-dimensional spaces, people actually try to realize, try and understand them. And there's one mathematician, Charles Howard Hinton, who calculated a four-dimensional cube. Now, a normal cube in three-dimensional space has 1, 2, 6 faces, 12 edges, and 8 points. So he tried to calculate what a four-dimensional cube would look like. All equal sides. He figured out how many edges, how many points, how many faces it would have. And that is called a tesseract. Hinton invented the tesseract, if you've heard of it before. He invented the tesseract. And then Hinton developed all kinds. What would a sphere look like in four-dimensional space? And he tried to think about them, all the edges and everything, and tried to realize four-dimensional space. He did this for 20 years, was never able to do it. But he tried. We cannot think in four-dimensional spaces or five-dimensional space-times. They're the equivalent. Because all of our experiences through four-dimensional space-time are just three-dimensional space. How we understand that is going to a lesser dimension. This sheet is a two-dimensional surface, right? But if I can curve that two-dimensional in the outer dimension, and I can mention how a two-dimensional surface curves into a third dimension, then I should be able to logically, not sensually or intuitively, but logically anyhow, understand how a three-dimensional space can curve into fourth dimension. So they actually build models of lower dimensional spaces, like you're talking about, to help us sort of picture a higher dimensional space. And the most famous book was written by Edwin Abbott in 1881. It's called Flatland. Have you ever read Flatland? Flatland by ABBOT. Edwin Abbott. It's actually a very famous book. You can still buy it, even though it was written 120 years ago. You can still buy it in Penguin paperback and in Dover paperback, and it must have gone into 1,000 printings. Well, he was fake name, that wasn't his real name. I can't remember what his real name was. But he was a friar or a clergyman in England. And he invented a world. And a world was populated by people by the name of a circle, and a square, and these people like this. And if you do that, now let me see, here's a square. A square lives within this two-dimensional sheet. So if he meets a circle right here, then they sort of bump into each other, don't they? Well, along comes one day a three-dimensional creature. Now, chalk is my three-dimensional creature. How does a square see the three-dimensional creature? He sees it as a circle because that's the cut through the three-dimensional creature. But then he noticed, if I was going to jump through a two-dimensional surface, first the two-dimensional being would see this cut, then that cut, then that cut, and that cut of me as I go through. So I see they get bigger and smaller as I go through two-dimensional space. A square learned about third dimension from a three-dimensional creature that popped through nearby him. He tried to tell a circle and all the other people that people this two-dimensional universe about it, and they all thought he was nuts and threw him in jail. So here's a square. A square is in jail in two-dimensional space. How does he get out? He walks out of two-dimensional space into third dimension and enters a two-dimensional space on the other side of the jail cell. You can actually move through solid objects. If I could step in four-dimensional space, from three-dimensional space right here, first of all, my left hand, right hand would be reversed. My heart would move to the other side of the body. My kidneys would switch. My my appendix would go from there to there. But I'd walk out of four-dimensional or three-dimensional space here, and I'd enter a three-dimensional space on the other side of the wall, in the hallway, and I never will pass through this wall or through the doors and the windows. So we all the time imagine those lower dimensional spaces, computer models but otherwise, to help us realize the properties of higher dimensional space. So that's something they've been doing for, what you bring up, they've been doing it for 100 years at least. Flatland is very easy. You can find that all over. Get it at the used bookstore, it's a lot cheaper. I know they had 2 or 3 copies of it at the used bookstore a couple months ago here. Other questions? Yeah.
If life is the bridge between the four-dimensional line we have there and the fifth-dimensional mind-consciousness complex, when a person dies and they have no more physical input from the four-dimensional, that we would say is the real world, why would they have any, why would we say there would be a ghost if they had no physical link?
Well, you have to realize, the fifth dimension is not separate from four-dimensional space-time. The fifth dimension is actually this whole dimension, so a very small part of the fifth dimension actually passes through four-dimensional space-time. So in that sense, a very, very small part of the fifth dimension exists within four-dimensional space-time. In that sense, the mind-consciousness complex still exists to a very small amount in four-dimensional space-time, but without any materiality. Because what is matter? Matter is the particle here. It's outside of that particle, so it has no materiality. It's still physical, but not material. And that could be what is called a ghost or an apparition, or a spirit, depending on your language. I try and stay away from ghosts like spirit and soul. I even talked similar to this in Seoul, Korea, a year and a half ago. One of the first questions from a young lady, college age, where does God fit in this? And I said, well, I'm a scientist. I can't talk about God or soul. But if you want to find the soul or God in this, be my guest. I have my opinion of where that would be. You can have your own opinion of where that could be. So there'd still be a minimal existence in the fourth dimension, but it'd be very boring for a five-dimensional being. Up here, which would you rather have? Being stuck in the four-dimensional space-time or exploring the whole universe? Now, we talked about there being a limit to the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light down here in four-dimensional space-time. Guess what? In the fifth dimension, you're outside of time. There's no speed limit. Warp is here. That's where your warp drives exist, if you can figure out how to do it. Few people already have. Really, scientists. At least one scientist already has a theory of how a warp drive would work, using general relativity.
I heard somebody explain that you can't, the light speed limit is a wall that you can't go through, but you can jump over.
Well, this would be a wormhole. A wormhole would literally be like this. If you could open a hole from one part of the four-dimensional space-time to another, that's what they call a wormhole. Now, the funny thing is, all different kinds of scientists talk about wormholes. Jumping out of four-dimensional space-time and back into four-dimensional space-time. But they never talk about where is a wormhole between the time it jumps out of four-dimensional space-time and back into four-dimensional space-time. Now, the number of scientists in the world right now that believe in Einstein's five-dimensional theory probably numbers under 10. And they found out about it, most of them, from me. I seem to be the only person in the world who knows about these papers that Einstein wrote between 38 and 41. At the Tucson Consciousness Conference, I was talking to the scientists about, wow, the physicists I work with in my college, they've never heard of those papers before. And so I was giving them references to them. I'm not exaggerating, joking. I have my stuff, all this on the internet, and people send notes to me every once in a while. Oh, gee, where can I find more information on the five-dimensional spaces you're talking about? Because it's just not taught in physics. Einstein was considered an eccentric for the last 30 years of his life while he was doing this work. He was out of touch with quantum physics and didn't totally believe in it, so he was considered something of an eccentric and a pariah. And as far as I'm concerned, that's when he did his best work. They're only now beginning to realize that's when Einstein did his best work.
Here to give a reference now.
Look up Einstein, Bergman, and Bargman in 1938. I can give it to you. I've got it in my office if you want. I can look up actually, instead of that, I'll give you my card with my web page on. You just go to my web page and get it off the bibliography. You get all my writing off the internet. I should have brought more cards with me. I think I've only got a couple of my cards. I don't have any of my cards here today. I left them on a checkbook and didn't bring my checkbook. Oh, well. I'll give you the address so you can look it up on the internet. You can catch me around and get a card from me later. Any other questions? I hope you all enjoyed this little consciousness-raising experience.
Enlightening.
Pardon? Enlightening, yes. Thank you all for coming.